What is going on to all my Atlanta fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again, breaking down this third season of Atlanta, episode 7, titled Trini to the Bone. We got some flavor, we got some soul, we got some culture, and we got a funeral to discuss in tonight's spoiler review. But before we get into the discussion, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to the channel and love early movie reviews, TV breakdowns, and live streams, well, come and join the community today by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And as you all can see on the screen now, if you enjoy what I had to say about this 7th episode of season 3 of Atlanta, well, make sure you all are liking the review as well as sharing it. But speaking of sharing, go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments, from your pros, your cons, favorite moments, funniest moments, moments that didn't work for you all. And speaking of moments that didn't work, I'm just kind of curious, as far as this is our 7th episode, and there's a pattern here. This is our 3rd solo episode, and what I mean by solo, it's the 3rd episode without our main cast, episode 1, 4, and 7. Where does episode 7 rank amongst the other 2 solo episodes? And just as a whole, where does the 7th episode rank for you as an entire season? Let's have that discussion in the comments. Full spoilers ahead as we break it all down. We open the episode with meeting one of our main characters who goes by the name of Miles. We see him doing his morning exercise, listening to hip hop, which I found it really, not to judge, but I would never imagine, based on his characteristics, that he would be someone that listens to hip hop. But I will say, between him and his wife, and let me know how you all feel about this, Miles seemed to be more receptive to culture than she was. Let me know how you all felt about that. But going into the house now, we see that Sylvia hasn't arrived, and we learn that Sylvia is Sebastian's babysitter. And Sebastian hasn't touched his breakfast yet because, as he puts it, it's a little bland, this egg Benedict, which I am not an egg fan, so I definitely understand it. But if you put some flavor on it, maybe I'll give it a bite or two. As he says, well, Dad, maybe if you go ahead and put Sylvia's spicy curry mango on there, I'll go ahead and give it a bite or two. Which you kind of get very early on, that Sylvia was very heavily involved in his life and gave him some culture, some much needed culture in his life, because his parents aren't as flavorful, to say the least. But getting into it here, they do find out, unfortunately, that Sylvia has passed on, and they have to kind of figure out, okay, how do we go about telling our son about death, and particularly about losing someone very close to them. But speaking of Sylvia, we can go ahead and have that conversation now. There's definitely, Sylvia was in this episode, like, she was a ghost. She was in several moments that we'll talk about as the door is knocked on and there's a mysterious package that I have a theory about a little bit later. But let's just go ahead and say her ghost was very present in this episode. But getting back into it, let me know if I'm looking too much into this here. It wasn't explicitly said, and I don't want to say they were bad parents, but there were subtle cues saying that they weren't the most attentive parents. Now, one example of that, as we see the wife on the conversation on the FaceTime, she talks about when she dropped off her son, which, by the way, again, you see just little things of Sylvia was very, Sebastian loves Sylvia, walking him to class, this, that, and the other. But she says to her husband, the teacher mentioned that, the parents, the husband and the wife did not attend the photo day, which we'll get into my thoughts on that photo a little bit later. But again, that was just a subtle cue that they're not as attentive as they think they are. Like, they think they're there by giving him, black culture, having him learn Mandarin, but they're not present enough to really implement their own traditions and their own culture on their son. I think that was something that was very subtly hinted at in this episode. Let me know your thoughts on all of that as we get back into it. Time to have that conversation, which, speaking of conversation, I definitely have some questions I want to pose to you all. We see that they're tiptoeing around how to talk about death, and when he brings up the dog, she's like, no, we're not going that route, Miles. But, they ultimately, Miles just flat out says she died. And we see little Sebastian say, well, can she come back to say goodbye, which I think she does by the end of this episode. But the conversation I want to have with you all is when it comes to death. Now, this question I want to ask everyone, but in particularly for my parents out there. I'm not a parent. When is the appropriate time for you? And there's no wrong answers here, obviously, but when do you think is the right time to have that conversation with your child in regards to what it means to die and what death means? And the second question I have, and this is for open to anyone, How do you all feel, and not to get too personal, but how do you all feel about death in regards to, obviously, as I mentioned in this episode, in America and in many places in the world, death is looked at as a view of sadness, depression, and just, upset. You lose someone close to you. But then in other cultures, not saying that they're not as sympathetic, but other cultures, they celebrate death, right? They celebrate the life of the person that has passed. So I'm just curious. I kind of fall in the middle of that. Like, of course, I'm sad when I lose someone. I lost someone very important to me a couple years ago, and I'm still not recovering from that, if I'm being honest. But, as I've gotten older, I've learned to kind of appreciate life and death and the beauty of death and life and the circle of life and all that stuff. But again, just kind of curious, one, for my parents and to anyone out there, when do you think is a good age to tell your kids and younger generations about death? And then how do you all perceive death? Just kind of curious. And this is why I love this show, because you can talk about anything with this show. And that's a conversation I want to have with you all. But Miles wants to honor his son's wishes. He wants to bring Sebastian to the funeral. And again, the wife is not too receptive to it, but ultimately they do decide to take him to this funeral. And right off the bat, again, speaking of the subtlety in regards to how important Sylvia was to just this young man's life, he can't go to bed, which again, he scared the hell out of his mom when they were talking about, again, subtle cues. I would like Sebastian to maybe learn Mandarin. If he wants to be in the business and he scares her, he says that he's afraid. We see that she, tries to get him to bed, and Sylvia was very heavily involved in his life, rubbing his back, singing some sweet TNT, and she's like, I don't know that song, honey, and she doesn't even know. She's like, Mama, you ain't doing it right. Again, Sylvia was I thought that was so funny. Sylvia was very heavily involved there, but time to go to the actual funeral. We see them driving up there. They meet Sylvia's daughter, as she calls him, little curry mouth boy, and again, little Sebastian knew more. He was more on game than his parents, as the people at the funeral calling him a roach. And, he talks about how that means that you're kind of unwelcome or someone that's not like necessarily fitting in the party. Little Sebastian was on it. And we're going to talk about, yes, Lord, amen. Little Sebastian had me dying in this episode. But I don't know if you all caught this little subtle talk about subtleties. There was an Easter egg there, and I'm very interested. I might be looking way too much into this Easter egg when we see Miles parking his car with who, by the way, Reggie looked no older than 13 years old. Hi, Reggie. Hey, Reggie, can you make sure you don't... Reggie, I thought that was hilarious. But on the backdrop, I don't know if you all saw it, there were Paperboy tour posters, and it said, Coming Home Tour, October 31st, Terminal 5, which is a venue in New York City. That makes me wonder, okay, I wonder if that's an Easter egg for this season, like we're going to see them come back to the U.S. by the end of the season, or that's like a cue for season 4, they're going to be coming back to the U.S. Let me know if you all caught that Easter egg, and timing-wise, is that to be seen in this season, or do you think that they're going to make their coming home tour next season? Just kind of curious, your thoughts on that cool little Easter egg. But this is where things got very funny for me, as we are now in the funeral. We meet Devin, who is a Little Leagues coach. He is a spiritual therapist, but more importantly, and this is the big one here, he's a TV installer. He's trying to, sell himself and find a replacement for their young kid. I thought that was so damn funny, because there's a theme in this funeral. And I've been to quite a few funerals, more so when I was a kid. I haven't been to a funeral in a while, which is a good thing. But there is a time and a place, and there were many times at this place that was just not the right time to be having these conversations, that being one of them. But then they meet Curtis, aka I think is a nod at future Bash. Like, I think that was Bash in the future, because that is clearly a white man, but he has a very thick accent, as he was also babysitted by Sylvia. Again, I thought that was so funny, because I saw that was clearly a white man. That was a future of young Bash. That's what Bash is going to look like if he would have continued to be babysitted by Sylvia, which isn't a bad thing. But again, I just found that to be very funny that we meet Curtis, aka future Bash. And again, just a little subtle here. This is where I was just dying laughing with little Sebastian when they get to praying, and he's just like, yes, Lord, amen. And the parents looking at it like, whose kid is this? That little boy has some soul to him, thanks to Sylvia. And it's time to get into another funny moment, as Sylvia used to be. We get a little bit of backstory. She used to be a belly dancer. And this, I am so confused by this scene. We see Miles, and obviously they're at the funeral. He gets an airdrop by someone by the name of Gooch Lickman. And again, I wasn't clear of what that photo was, but I'm very aware what a gooch is. For you all that don't know, for my kids out there, this is explicit, so you've been warned. What a gooch is, you can look it up. A gooch is the spot on a male between his balls and his asshole, and it's a sensitive spot, which some men, and to each your own, it's not my cup of tea, but some people like to be felt up in that moment. But I was just very curious on who in the hell sent him that, and what does that mean? I was kind of lost on that. Let me know how you all interpreted it from Gooch Lickman, which was just so random. Let's talk about it. But moving on, we get back into the conversation, and I don't know if you all noticed, one of her daughters, I think her name was Princess. I used to have a friend that I went to high school with. He was from Trinidad, and his mom used to always make that sound when she was mad at him. I always looked at when she was when they were talking about she used to go to Trinidad and send her family money, and Princess clearly didn't feel that same way because she was and I never asked him what that meant. I just always assumed that was the literal noise from your mouth, from rolling your eyes, or please type of moment. So that Princess wasn't, I wouldn't say she wasn't, the happiest person, but she definitely had some beef with her mama. As we cut to them remembering Sylvia with Julia Edwards, who's a famous dancer from Trinidad, and we see that they're doing this inspired dance. And again, Sebastian was like, yay! So excited to see this ritual taking place. And this is where Princess, again, she wasn't having it. She goes up on the mic. Again, like I mentioned, there's a time, there's a place. She didn't care where they were at. She wanted to let everyone know how she felt about her mom and the sacrifices, which is something that I found to be a very interesting conversation about how certain people in this episode in particular, Sylvia used to take care of all these kids, which seems to be, again, based on the kids that we saw. Sebastian was white, Curtis is white. I wondered if she only babysit white kids to give them some culture, to kind of help out the world, to get white people a little bit more cultured. Again, kind of joking, but really not. So I'm very intrigued on that conversation, because she's like, Mama, the son's like, Mama just did that to put food on our table, to support us. And obviously Princess didn't feel that way. She felt like the mom was abandoning them. And I've been, again, to my fair share of funerals when I was younger. I never got it to that extent, like a Medea's funeral, when people are banging on the casket. But I've seen the passing outs, and I've seen the tears, and I've seen the yelling, and I've seen a couple fights, but not to the extent of this particular scene. But everything is now popping off. We got people fighting in the funeral. We got one older woman talking about, take me with you. I've seen that a few times, not going to the casket, but those words being said out loud. And this is where we see Curtis, world star, because they're fighting. And we see Devin talking about, a young boy, we scared the white people. And the young man, Bash says, yes, that I am scared. But it's a very sentimental moment here, as he says, this is our sad. This is, again, you can't tell anyone how to grieve, how to process death. And that was their way of being sad, which goes back to that conversation we had a little bit earlier. But notice how Miles, again, hip-hop, and taking in some culture as they're driving home, singing Sweet and TT, and the wife's just rolling her eyes. But wrapping it all up here, we see that Bash says goodnight to his mom, but he also says goodnight to Sylvia. And I ain't gonna lie, I was looking at that pillow. That pillow was moving. She was definitely there in that chair. Let me know your thoughts on that. But then we end with them talking about, was it the right thing to take him to the funeral? Which again brings me to that question about, when is the right time to have that conversation? When is the right time to put younger kids into, the conversation about death, as Miles, as wants to be a steel band artist as he grows up. But it goes back into them being kind of absent, and them not having their own kind of culture and traditions in place, and they're just kind of clueless. They're allowing other people to raise their children. But wrapping up, this is the interesting moment here. Very late at night, there's banging at the door. Miles goes to it. It's that same package that Sylvia was supposed to be getting in her house. He finally opens it, and it's a bunch of photos of Sylvia and Sebastian. And the last photo is kind of like I said, that type of noise. That was the type of face that Sylvia and the Bash was giving that photo. And I kind of took that in, and as we end with Sweet TT, which is a banger of a song, Trini to the bone. That is a fire song. I used to listen to that a lot growing up back in the day. But anyway, this goes back to the conversation. Now, remember earlier in the episode when they didn't go to his photo shoot at school, and again, going back to them being not attentive, I thought that she was giving them the photos and essentially saying, without explicitly saying, do better, be better parents, be present in their life, which is funny because if you look at Princess, she felt like she wasn't present in her life. So it's kind of a hypocrisy going on with Sylvia, but neither here nor there. She is pretty much saying just be more present, be in your son's life, because there's little moments like this that can shape them, right? And again, she was very influential in his culture and his knowing, being peeped up on game, having some flavor on his food, knowing different cultures. It makes you a more rounded, a well-rounded individual, which also just kind of goes to going back into the conversation when Bash asks if he could say goodbye to her. That was her ghost saying goodbye to him. She wanted to give him those photos because it did mean something to him, and she meant something to him. So that was like her way of saying goodbye, going to the whole ghost theory of this episode. But overall, I found it to be very interesting that, again, this episode was very heavily focusing on what cultures can do when you're cultured at a young age. How, again, I feel like we saw in this episode, they're like, maybe we should teach some Mandarin. Maybe we should have a younger person being brought of our kid's life. And it's just like they're putting all this culture on them, but they're not teaching him culture. They're just throwing it at him. And that's, again, I think something I took away from this episode, as well as just shielding the younger generation from things like death, as well as just showing you when you surround yourself with different cultures, which I've always been an advocate of, and I always try to learn something new every single day of my life, especially the older I get. When you're taught culture at a young age, it really shapes you for the better, in my opinion. Not everyone feels that way, but I think when you're shown different cultures and you're around different cultures, it just makes you a more well-rounded individual, and you're just more receptive to just being more open to just many different walks of life. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I had a fun time at that funeral. I think it does pose a lot of questions due to culture and lack of culture, and what it can do when you throw culture at someone, when you don't parent your child, when you shield your child. And then, of course, yes, Lord, yes, amen. I had a fun time with it. But hey, those are my thoughts on the 7th episode. Let me know yours. Again, your pros, your cons, your thoughts, your theories on the ghost idea of this episode, as well as do we speculate that Paperboy, Al, Earn, Van, and Darius will be making their way back home by the end of the season or by season 4? Let's discuss that in the comments. If you stuck around to this point in the review, I appreciate every single one of you all for supporting these reviews every single week. Before you leave, make sure you like the review, share the review, leave your thoughts in the comments, and like I said, come and join the community, come and join this family by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Hope you all enjoyed the review. Hope you're staying safe. As you can see on the screen now, come and join the community. Check out my other Atlanta reviews. Check out my most recent video. We'll catch you all on the next breakdown.